name is Sandra, and I've got a confession to make. I recently bought my first ever car. I made it to the age of 47 without owning a car, and now I've got a very big, petrol-guzzling, SUV-type monstrosity of a car, and I'm absolutely loving it, which is frowned upon in the mobility as a service industry because we're all about reducing car ownership, right? So I'll solve the puzzle in a minute. I want to start with talking about disability and just make sure we're all on the same page here. When I talk about accessibility, I don't just mean putting out a ramp for a wheelchair. Accessibility is a term that's a lot wider, that I want you to think about people with vision impairments, hearing impairments, mental health issues, people on the autism spectrum, people like me who've got musculoskeletal issues. I can walk, but I limp, my balance is bad. There are millions of people like me out there. They're wheelchair users, obviously. They're the elderly. And there are all sorts of people with different abilities and different mobility needs. And we all need to use transport. And in the European Union, officially there are about 70 million people with some form of disability. I think probably if you count all these groups that I just mentioned, the number is probably a lot larger. But 1 in 3 of these people see transport as a major barrier to participate in life and work. So why is this so hard? Why is transport so hard for people like me? And sadly, this slide only took me a few minutes to put together. If you just have a quick look at it, you see just all sorts of transport nightmares for people with disabilities. And obviously, there's a lot of outrage in these headlines. But if you look a bit deeper and if you try to understand what are the actual issues, they're very complex. There's a mix of lack of information, lack of data, regulation, education, training issues, infrastructure issues. There's a whole combination of problems there that people with disabilities face in transport at the moment. And here's a really interesting example. This art installation, the wheelchair you see on the right, was done by an Italian artist in Milan a few years ago, and he wanted to demonstrate that car sharing is not very joyful for all of us. For some people, actually, there's not a lot of joy in using new mobility services. So if you just remember one thing from what I've just said, it's this: when you have mobility issues, more often than not, transport really sucks. And that is also why I bought a car. I live in London now. I find getting around really, really hard. So I'm enjoying my petrol-guzzling monstrosity of a vehicle right now. So the question is, can mobility as a service help? Can it make this better and easier for people with different needs? So I want to look at the definition of mobility as a service quickly. So the MaaS Alliance is the most prominent industry body for mobility as a service at the moment, and their definition is that MaaS integrates various forms of transport into a single mobility as a service that's accessible on demand. And MaaS also should be the best value proposition for the users. So MaaS is not just about putting lots of different modes on the road, scooters and Ubers and other ride shares and all that. It's about providing information for the user, which you can see here. So this is kind of the ideal MaaS world where we know everything. We just pick up our phone and our phone tells us all there is in the transport world around us. It tells us where to park, it tells us what train to take, how long it's going to take, where the train is the busiest, if I can take my bike on the train, if this vehicle is accessible. All that should be available in this ideal MaaS world. So there are a lot of opportunities with mobility as a service. There's a lot of new hardware coming out, so like autonomous on-demand shuttles, for example, like cooler types of wheelchairs that can be used in airports, for example. But it's also, for us, it's a lot about data. So I work for an Australian software company, and we do routing algorithms for mobility as a service, we currently integrate with over 3,000 transport service providers worldwide. We're not an accessibility specialist. That's just a little niche project that we run on the side. And so this is what we can do at the moment. We can take accessibility data and integrate it into a regular routing, so you can actually select wheelchair or an accessible mode as a form of transport, and then you get a completely different route that someone else would get who doesn't have any accessibility needs. So open data is really, really important for us, because without open data, we wouldn't be able to do this at all. Unfortunately, we've never had anyone approach us commercially and say, let's take this and make it better. So we're just doing this as a little side project and offer it to city councils who want to use journey planners, and also provide opportunities for inclusiveness in transport. So what's the next step in this? And here I've tried to put together how we can get to an accessible MaaS ecosystem. So we need the holy grail of regulation funding and also cooperation with advocacy groups to create this environment that fosters awareness and encourages companies and transport service providers, but also puts a bit of pressure on them, not just after the fact, like it happened with the likes of Ubers, who needed to be sued in order to provide wheelchair accessible vehicles. So I think that pressure should come from the start, and it should be a carrot and stick model, I guess, to incentivize and pressurize transport service providers to make sure they are as inclusive as possible. And so they can use new technologies, they can provide open data, and they integrate universal design from the start into their products. And then we get this accessible MaaS ecosystem that doesn't just help people with reduced mobility, but it helps a whole wider audience. It helps people who want to take their bicycle on the train. It helps people with temporary injuries. It helps people with young families with prams, and it helps tourists who need to wheel around big suitcases. So that's my ideal MaaS ecosystem that I hope will be considered in the future. So this is my last slide. I think MaaS is a really unique chance to create accessible trip chains for everyone. And access to transport is access to life, and everyone should have the right to transport. So making sure that we create an accessible MaaS ecosystem is really, really important. So if you work in any kind of capacity in transport, it would be great if you keep that in mind for the future and include it as early as possible in your product pipeline or in your technology or in whatever you're working on. Thank you very much. Have a good Friday. Thanks.